Radio for Justice brings you Up to the Minute. News and conversation around the criminal legal system in Colorado and beyond. Welcome to Up to the Minute.
Welcome to Up to the Minute on Colorado Radio for Justice. I am your host, Tiffany McCoy.
And I'm Michael Clifton, co-host with Colorado Radio for Justice.
And we are here with our guest, Kyle Giddings. How are you doing today?
Doing good. Good to be here again with you guys, and excited to talk to you about all the wild things that have happened post-session.
So what are the wild things?
Yeah. We've had some vetoes, we've had some bill signings, just lots of everything going down. It's been really interesting to see how everything's come together and what decisions Governor Polis has made since the legislative session has ended. We've had some really good bills signed and unfortunately some really good bills vetoed by the governor. So we had Senate Bill 1, the Colorado Voting Rights Act, that was signed. And so that gave additional protections to incarcerated voters. So they would be able to seek legal remedies if their voting rights were suppressed while they were incarcerated in county jails throughout the state. So that was a great win. The special needs parole bill was signed. So folks who are inside a prison who qualify for special needs parole, who are sick or elderly, they will now have more options and better strengthening of definitions around what medical needs are to be able to get out and back home so they can seek better treatment. We also had the Senate bill, it creates a panel of incarcerated folks as well as legislators that will be able to suggest legislation, a legislation inside panel. To be able to suggest bills to the legislature. I think they get 3 bills every year where they will be able to actually have an impact at the legislature.
Yes, I believe that bill is Senate Bill 155, Legislative Inside Advisory Council that was passed.
Yeah, it's like kind of a first of its kind thing. And it's really amazing, honestly, to see that to have folks who are currently incarcerated developing policy that will become law that will directly impact the folks that are inside. So I'm really excited to see what comes of that. But then we also had a lot of really great bills, unfortunately, get vetoed by Governor Polis so far. One of those bills was 1147, something that for regular listeners of this station would have known is the municipal transparency bill as well as the sentencing bill. So what we have done is made sure that municipal governments couldn't have sentences that were higher than the state level. So if you were arrested on one side of the street, you got 7 days in jail, and if you're arrested on the other, you could have got 300 days in jail for the exact same crime. Unfortunately, Governor Polis vetoed that bill. And in his veto letter explaining that he wanted to make sure that local governments had what was described as a home rule, which is this aspect of in the Colorado Constitution, making sure that local governments have control of how their government runs, and thought that maybe it infringed on that. We don't think it does that because we think having that big of a sentencing disparity, which we were seeing happening across the state from Westminster to Pueblo, where individuals were receiving crazy sentences that they would have never received on the state level happening. We think that's a constitutional issue where home rule doesn't apply. But unfortunately, Governor Polis disagreed, and so that bill was vetoed. And then there was House Bill 1026, which is a bill that we worked on with Stand for Children, which is usually an educational advocacy organization, but they've started getting involved a lot with fees and fines involved in the criminal justice system because they were starting to see that when parents and as well as juveniles were starting to be really burdened by fees and fines involved with the criminal justice system, they couldn't advocate for their children inside of schools, or they couldn't advocate for a better home life because they were being burdened by overburdensome restitution or the fees and fines of the criminal justice system. So they ran 1026, which would have eliminated co-pays inside of prisons for medical care. And Governor Polis vetoed that bill. Right now, folks had to pay $5 for a medical visit inside of prison, which is an astronomical amount of money if you are an indigent person inside a prison. When you're making, well, it's about to go up to a whole $1 a day, but I know, but right now it's 62 cents a day. So while Governor Polis said he agreed this kind of co-payment was too much money for individuals, he said that a bill that micromanages the DOC was too much. And so he vetoed it, but then signed an executive order that immediately started micromanaging the DOC, trying to get them to figure out how to lower copays. So it was a bit of a confusing veto because he didn't have to write the executive order. He could have just signed the bill and it was done. And so we will see what comes of that in the end.
So speaking of these bills that were vetoed, what are the next steps? What does it look like moving forward?
Yeah. Oh, that is a great question. So right now, they're dead, gone forever until next session. So in Colorado, every year we have a legislative session, 120 days starting usually the first or second week of January until about the first or second week of May. It's statutorily and required in our Constitution that it is 120 days. And so these issues can come back and we can write new legislation and tweak it or change it, whatever the governor really disliked, and try to run the bill again. But people keep running the same legislation, trying to figure out the right pathway. But for some of these other issues that Governor Polis has been really clear he's going to veto over and over and over again, what people are starting to look forward to is that Governor Polis only has one more year in office, and then we get a new governor. Right now, there's a few folks that are in the governor's race. We have the current Attorney General, Phil Weiser, and our current U.S. Senator, Michael Bennet. They're current front runners in the Democratic primary, and there's a handful of Republicans as well. There's Representative Scott Bottoms and Senator Baisley in the state Senate as well. So there's folks out there. So for a lot of folks, they're trying to figure out, do they run the bill again, or do they wait until we have a new governor and see if they go for it and figure it out from there? But yeah, so there's not only those bills that got vetoed, but there was a handful of bills that died on the calendar too, that the governor really didn't like. One of them being one of our bills, House Bill 1214, which was the only bill this session to stop the prison population from continuing to grow. And that bill would have helped folks that are going in for like really short sentences, people that have like a lot of pretrial confinement credits or earned time from when they were in the halfway house or something that got resentenced from being stuck in the Department of Corrections for 14 months or less and having their whole life completely disrupted and getting clogged up in the DOC system. It would have given alternatives for sentencing. But that bill died on the calendar because the governor didn't like it.
So you were talking about we're going to write new legislation, and they, who are we and they? Who are the legislation writers?
Great. That is a great question. So for a lot of folks, like these bills that we've been working on, the we is us, CCJRC, but like community organizations like Rebecca Wallace with the Colorado Freedom Fund, or the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, or the public defenders. Like there's so many different groups out in community that work really closely with elected officials to develop and make legislation. And so those are the we's. You always need an elected official, though, to get a bill because they're the ones that run the bill and everything. So it's usually community members or lobbying groups, sometimes not always great lobbying groups, but sometimes there's people like us out there trying to do the good work who are developing the legislation and getting those sponsors. Yeah.
And for the bills that either died on the floor or was either vetoed, is the legislation, are they starting from scratch? Are they trying to run the same bills again?
Yeah, no. So sometimes it is literally the same identical bill. I can think of one instance where it was overdose prevention sites places where people could go and use drugs in a safe place, and in case if they do overdose, there were people there to help them reverse the overdose. That bill was literally 2 sentences, and it was the same bill for 2 separate years, and it was never made it through the House chambers, but the sponsors introduced the exact same bill multiple times. But in some cases, like I think of this union bill that's been going through a couple times, they take it, they get it through, it gets vetoed, so they come back, they completely rewrite it, and then they come back with a completely new piece of legislation with the hopes of the same end goals, but like different verbiage, different bringing in different parts that the governor may have flagged, being like, it needs to do this, not this, and so they rewrite it to do that. So yeah, it just really kind of depends on the situation.
Thank you so much, Cal, for really giving us some insight into those bills. Can we go back to some of the wins, right?
Yeah.
The voting right bill that was signed. And can you talk about what that bill did as far as the protections? Because we already had a lot of the voting rights and access to voting, unless you were inside a facility. So can you talk about what protections that bill provides?
Yeah, absolutely. So what the Colorado Voting Rights Act does for incarcerated voters is it builds upon the protections we created last year in Senate Bill 72. So in Senate Bill 72, we created access to in-person voting for everyone inside of county jails throughout the state. So it created in-person voting, 6 hours, mandatory during every general election. And it also guaranteed access to candidate information, ballot information inside of the jails. Because what we were seeing is that jails were like, oh, you can't put that information into the jail. It's partisan, you can't do that. But that meant that folks had to just figure out ways to educate themselves on candidates with incredibly limited resources. They can't just Google a candidate, because they have no access to the internet. And so what COVRA did was take everything we put into Senate Bill 72 and then create legal structures to defend it. And so it created legal remedies to defend if a voter felt like they weren't able to gain access to their ballot. So they could seek legal remedy using the Office of the Attorney General, who would represent them. And then if they felt like they were being denied access to information about candidates or ballot initiatives, it would also give them the power of the Office of the Attorney General to seek remedies for that. So it took folks who were formerly incarcerated or currently incarcerated, which I was an incarcerated voter at one point myself, and went from having to figure out how to navigate the system and then suddenly giving them the power of the most highest level of law enforcement in our state to advocate for them. So it was a really big win.
And did this bill provide funding as well?
Sure does. They don't have to pay for representation at all. So
thanks so much for sharing all this information and keeping us up to date, Kyle. Can you kind of let us know what the temperature is like? In a previous episode, you talked about the pendulum swinging to kind of being like tough on crime. Is it still feeling like that? What's your thoughts?
Yeah. The temperature is, I think right now we're right on the cusp of boiling. We are quickly approaching the need for Colorado to have to build a new prison for the first time in 22 years. The men's population vacancy rates in beds is at 0.5%. So only less than 1% is vacant right now in the state of Colorado, which is really scary. The women's population is going down for the first time, which is great, but the men's population is about to burst. And we're seeing a great deal of tense situations happening within the Department of Corrections. We know there's 3 wardens on administrative leave. We're hearing that there's abuse cases happening And there's a legislative audit of the Department of Corrections finances that are about to come out. And it's not just only in DOC, it's also in the jails, it's in the courts, it's everywhere. There's so much pressure in the system. And on top of all that, there is this culture shift that is happening right now where people want to be more punitive. We saw in the 2024 election with the passage of Prop 128, which would create a truth in sentencing for certain violent crimes in Colorado, that there's this shift starting to happen again. And the governor is seeing that same shift and is choosing to veto and push back against true reform. But we know, and many of the listeners on this station, I think, also know and believe that that is not how we solve the issues of the criminal justice system, or even just the issues that we face in society, is disappearing people into cages. And so we're here at CCJRC as a community to start pushing back even harder against that narrative. And so we are organizing, we are getting together as a community to start making sure the narrative of how we take care of our neighbors is making sure they are loved here at home and not away in Canyon City or in Fremont or up in Weld County, and they are loved by their neighbors here at home. And so we're going to be working really hard this next session to make sure that prison is never going to be built, and that if anything, we're going to be working towards a world where we're closing more prisons and not building them.
Yes. Providing that care before we send people to prison, right? Mm-hmm. And stop looking at, it as individual issues and more as societal issues.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kyle.
All right. Thanks, guys. I'm really excited because we have a new colleague that we just hired, Kym Ray, who is going to come talk to you guys about one of the big wins of this session, about visitation rights for folks who are inside of the incarceral system here in Colorado. So I would love to hand it off over to Kym if you guys got a second.
Yes.
All right.
Once again, this is Up to the Minute. We are here at the Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition. Thank you, Kyle, for joining us. And in just a moment, we'll be continuing our conversation with Kym Ray.
Back here, I'm Michael Clifton, and I'm here with my co-host, Tiffany McCoy for Colorado Radio for Justice, and on location at Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition. And our next guest for Colorado Radio for Justice Up to the Minute is Kym Ray. Thanks for being here with us, Kym.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
So cool. Kym, would you mind sharing us a little bit about your role?
Yes, so I am the Denver campaign coordinator for CCJRC, representing the organization on multiple campaigns here in the city of Denver. I've worked with CCJRC multiple times, and as you mentioned, last time I was here in my capacity as the co-facilitator for End Slavery Colorado. We were working on legislation, and then there's been this amazing opportunity that came in before. I was also a community organizer for an organization, Together Colorado, but I got to do the work of my passion and my heart by doing campaign coordination and management. So I'm super excited to make this shift.
Kym, are you still working with End Slavery Colorado?
Oh, absolutely. Outside of the visitation bill that, we've just recently, completed, we still have a very long-term agenda of making changes within the carceral system, Department of Corrections.
So can you tell us more about the visitation bill?
So yes, last Wednesday, the governor actually signed it. And as of right now, folks who are currently in the Department of Corrections have visitation rights. So
yes, and what does that mean?
So what that means is visitation can no longer be revoked just at the will of COs or the Department of Corrections. So no more for punishment for not working. You have to be convicted of a Class 1 violation so convicted, to be able to have your visitation restricted. Previously, if you were in restrictive housing, you only got the 1 20-minute phone call per, I think it was like 7 days. That's been reduced to 5 days, and they cannot restrict it for more than 30 days at a time. So really and truly, that's a huge change for people. And then also, Colorado's the first in the nation to actually consider visitation a right and not a privilege.
Can you share? I remember one of the previous episodes, there was about discrepancies between the women's visits and the men's visits. Did this bill address that as well?
We tried. Right. And so it really things, still remain the same for the women where visitation cannot be taken, for more, I think it was like more than 30 days. And then it had to be like pertaining to the loss of the visitation had to come from something that happened during, like, say, phone calls or something like that. So that doesn't change for them, but this is like a huge leap for the men. But even just across the board, it's like I said, it's no longer considered a privilege that can be revoked and taken at will. But definitely it's a right. And then because of the conversation, Department of Corrections is now looking at creating better standards around dressing and like the experience of visitation. So, I mean, that was even a win that it even, folks, they're listening to community and are starting to like realize like, okay, yeah, there are some things that are just not fair and bad. And how do we start addressing some of these issues?
When I was in prison, sometimes we did not know about things for a while after they happened and after laws passed and things changed. Do you know how people will find out about the new visitation law?
Well, so part of the good thing around this, because was widely paid attention to by family members and folks on the inside, a lot of folks are like already aware because they've been watching, but also, we're partnering with like folks like legislation on the inside, working with community members who have family on the inside. And then we're looking and planning to do like an education piece around like, where's the accountability piece in this, right? And folks who are reading the bill are like, oh, we got to file a grievance. Yeah, because that worked so well before, right? But not realizing like that filing the grievance is how we will know if Department of Corrections is following the law that we put forth, because they have to report on it during the SMART Act hearings. So they have to give numbers. So filing that grievance, even though it may seem like arbitrary, but it's actually essential for us to know if our bill is working the way that we want it to work. And then the governor has also agreed to do town halls as well as the what is it? It's like a community where folks from the community can go into the prisons and meet with the warden and such. Governor Polis has made a commitment to actually educate and talk to folks about this bill.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad you brought that up about the accountability because so basically if somebody felt like their right was being violated, they would still have to follow the administrative grievance process, but then they would have legal remedies outside of that in the courts, correct?
So we are following the process that's already in place, right? So there is not necessarily like you cannot sue for money because that's not going to work. But the grievance process that already exists is the one that we are utilizing in this moment. That's not to say things may or may not change if we discover this isn't working, but we at least said, let's try what already exists. And that was also a good way for us to get the bill to pass without adding a gargantuan fiscal note. But that's where we are in this moment.
We've talked about legislation inside a couple times in this episode. What is legislation inside?
So, Legislation on the Inside is a program that's currently being housed with the Corey Wise Innocence Project up in Boulder. Legislation just passed to codify this program, but it is across the prisons, multiple prisons, men and women. Get together, they look at legislation, and it's a way that folks on the inside, their voices are heard during the legislative process, as well as a way for legislators to be able to tap in and run legislation, not just legislators, but community organizations and coalitions to tap in and say, hey, this is what we're thinking, and get feedback from the folks that are closest to the pain and directly impacted. They do research like far better than I can, I'm gonna be honest. And they're super knowledgeable around what is happening. And when I say they, I mean the folks on the inside, super knowledgeable around what's happening. And they actually really do have opinions. And, you know, because they've lived it and are living it, I actually think most of the time their opinions are probably the most valid. But this is a way for them to be heard.
I'm just wondering, do you have a personal connection to this law? Is there like a reason why you feel so strongly about it, or?
Well, yes. To be really honest, as a kid who grew up with an incarcerated parent, I know the harm of disconnection can cause. But then also I do have loved ones that are currently incarcerated, and I know on the outside what it feels like when I haven't heard from my person. And it's like, oh, we were on lockdown because this happened, and it can be super arbitrary, right? But then to not even have any idea or knowing, or, you know, seeing folks who have driven to the prison and not even know that visitation has been revoked because the person couldn't work, was sick and couldn't work, but lost their visitation, or for whatever reason, it's important, you know, and even just that connection piece, because even down to phone calls and video visits, I may not be able to hop in my car and drive 3 to 4 hours to Canyon City or even further. But those phone calls mean something, and to be able to hear my person's voice, to know that they're okay. If it's a video visit, to see their face. And sometimes you do just need to put eyes on your person and let them know that they're supported, that they're loved, and that they haven't been forgotten about. All of those things matter, you know, and sometimes you do, I know I do, even on the outside. I just need to hear a voice of someone who cares about me to lift my spirits. And I believe that to be even more true for folks who are completely disconnected from their community and their loved ones.
Thing that happened to me a couple of times in prison, like sometimes in prison, you'll be calling people on the phone and like no one will answer, and you feel like you're like invisible, or like you're like in a dream, and like it's the weirdest thing. I don't know how those days happen in prison, but so the connection piece is really important. And to just know that somebody's answering the phone and you can talk to someone, you can see someone on a visit. Those things really matter in prison because it's easy to feel alone in there.
Oftentimes I've heard like, I'm not calling to ask for money. I just need to hear your voice. Right?
Yes, definitely. I just wanted to share that. I think it's key to connection, right? And not losing that communication. Thank you so much. We want to thank our guests, Cal Giddings and Kym Ray. I'm Michael Clifton, and this is my co-host, Tiffany McCoy, with Colorado Radio for Justice, Up to the Minute.
Up to the Minute is a production of Colorado Radio for Justice. Tune into our 24/7 broadcast on www.radioforjustice.org. Listen on the app from the App Store and Google Play. Catch this show and other original works shifting the narrative on the criminal legal system on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Colorado Radio for Justice.